Welcome to Wait, What Do You Do Again? I'm your host, Meghan DeFord, and today's guest, I am so excited to have her on, Charla Stevens. Charla spent nearly 4 decades as one of New England's leading employment attorneys, advising businesses, schools, healthcare organizations, and nonprofits through some of the most challenging workplace issues imaginable. She chaired the employment law practice at McLane Middleton for more than 20 years and earned recognition from chambers, best lawyers, super lawyers, and numerous professional organizations for her work. But after an incredibly successful legal career, Charla did something that many people dream about, but very few people actually do. She went out on her own, she reinvented herself, and she followed her dream. Today, through Charla Stevens Consulting, she helps organizations build healthier workplaces through leadership training, workplace investigations, strategic HR consulting, mediation, and conflict resolution. She's also a passionate advocate for attorney wellness, mental health, and creating work cultures where people can actually thrive. Today, we're talking about burnout, career reinvention, dysfunctional workplaces, yikes, difficult people, mental health, and what nearly 40 years of watching people at work has taught her about leadership and about being a human. Before we jump into our conversation, quick favor, if you've been enjoying Wait, What Do You Do Again? Would you please subscribe, leave a review, rate, share with a friend? It really helps people discover the show and our community grow. And I'm so grateful to you for being here, listening, being part of this conversation, and for helping other people discover the podcast as well. Charla, thank you for being here. I'm so excited for this conversation today. And I have to know, usually I ask people, how do you answer? What do you do? I'm really curious, did little Charla dream of becoming an employment lawyer? Or how did you get your way into this? Because it seems really stressful.
Oh, yeah, it has its stressful moments for sure. Yeah. She didn't dream of becoming an employment lawyer, but she certainly dreamt of becoming a lawyer. That was sort of always the plan.
Really?
Which is unusual. I mean, most people change course multiple times in their early lives or during their educational process, but I never did. I mean, I sort of morphed different types of law, different types of things that I was interested in. I was going to be a lawyer to run for Congress. I mean, there was that kind of thing, but it was always the law.
Did you have law in your family, or was it?
No, none.
Interesting.
I was just fascinated by it, whether it was TV lawyers or book lawyers. And I really enjoyed reading about cases. And I grew up in the 70s when there was lots of really interesting 60s and 70s. I was young, but lots of interesting civil rights litigation. And so I was just fascinated by it all. And
and so how did you end up landing on employment law?
I started in small firms when I first came out of law school. So I did all different kinds of things and immediately decided what I didn't like and I did a few employment cases and enjoyed them. And then when I went to a large firm, which was I'd been practicing maybe 17 years at that point. So, I had a fair amount of experience and had done a lot of different types of mostly litigation, because I think I knew from pretty early on that it was litigation and not real estate or corporate. And I started doing some employment work, and in larger firms, you tend to specialize. So that's where I drifted, and I was experienced enough at that point that they let me do what I wanted after a few years there. And it worked out well. Yeah.
And so when you're looking at employment law, do you specialize in different types of employment, or how did you approach that?
Yeah, so there's certain types that are really kind of niches, like employee benefits. I mean, that's very specialized, and you need to know a lot about tax law and things like that. That kind of goes to different people. Workers' comp is very different, very specialized, sort of rote, it's kind of the same thing all the time. But all of the other kinds of employment law, I pretty much did it all. And I think when people do employment law, they tend to drift one way or another, either litigation, representing employees or employers, or what they call counseling or risk management, which is you don't go to court, you try to solve problems early on. And I did both. So that was a little bit different, but it was more fun. I mean, litigation's fun. Until it's not.
What's fun about it? Tell us what's fun about it.
It's, you think about, that's what I was trained to do, right? I took trial practice courses and, moot court and legal writing. And it's fun to get into the fight,
Yeah.
do the battle, do the work, do examination, cross-examination, take depositions. But then after a while, when you do it for 30 years, it's like, oh,
Yeah.
here we
Yeah.
go again. And I don't want to argue anymore. I just want to try to be more, problem solving and, try to anticipate issues and, help companies who want to try to do the right thing. And although I did a little bit of plaintiff's work earlier in my career, most of what I did was management side. So representing employers and schools, I did a lot of education work. And there's a lot of employment law with that. And both employment law and education, there's a lot of crisis management. So your day never looks the same.
Yeah.
Which was way more fun.
Yeah.
And, you get to work in teams and you celebrate victories.
Yeah.
So that part of it is energizing. It can be exciting and there's a lot of emotional ups and downs, but it's good. But then later in my career, it's like, okay, I'm kind of getting a little weary of this and I want to do something different.
I can imagine. And you certainly were so well prepared in terms of your experience and you enjoyed it. Was there anything that you would do to personally prepare for the courtroom and keeping yourself centered? Or I can imagine that high stress environment for that many years is very wearing on you.
Yeah, it is. But I'll say you're in court a fair amount, doing things like arguing motions and doing conferences with judges, but actual trials, they don't happen that often.
Oh, interesting.
But if you're in a criminal world or maybe a little bit in divorce, domestic relations, which I did for a very short period of time. You're trying cases a lot more often, but most cases actually settle. So a lot of the preparation is you prepare for trial, constantly from the beginning, but you mediate, you take depositions, which is testimony under oath of witnesses. They call it discovery. So nothing's a surprise. I mean, it's not like Perry Mason, you don't have big surprises at trial or, you rarely have somebody falling apart on the stand and confessing that they did it. Once in a while, but very, very rarely. But even trials, you might have one or two a year. And then in later years, it was even less frequent than that. The court dockets are jammed and litigation is so expensive that ultimately people try to settle cases. I remember one person who was a lawyer who was a little bit older than me, so kind of a senior guy in another firm, and he used to call litigation the sport of kings because it's so costly. Things like electronic discovery, it's just mind-boggling how much it will cost to take a case to trial. So unless somebody's either entrenched in their position or feels that they need to get a court decision or can't resolve it, they usually resolve in some way. But you do get all worked up. And as far as preparing and getting centered, you always say, get lots of rest. And, it's hard to work all day and then prepare all night. So a lot of times it's, let's unwind and sort of relax and just make sure that you know what every piece of paper in your file says. And you don't always, but you like to think that you can prepare that way and have really good support. I'd always have a great paralegal or somebody with me who could put their hands on anything. So feeling like I've done the work, I know the case, but prepare for anything to happen because anything certainly can happen. Lots of surprises. I had a witness show up once to prepare for his testimony, and he was going to go on right after lunch. And I was trying a case with another colleague, and she smelled alcohol on his breath. And she's like, oh my God, what do we do? We ran into the bathroom and we're a ladies' room and we're trying like, what do we do? What do we do? And maybe you just have a drink at lunch or a beer at lunch just to relax. And it all worked out fine, but you go into major panic mode.
And so I can imagine high stress, lots of long hours, and this may be something that is just on TV or whatever, but did you find that burnout or addiction, or maybe I should say abuse versus addiction of substances or whatever, did you find that in the field? How are lawyers dealing with this stuff? Because I like to argue, but I can't imagine every day going in knowing this could be a battle. It's a big responsibility that you have. So I'm curious, how did you manage it? Were you able to have boundaries? Was it running or something else? And what are you seeing in the field of how lawyers are dealing with this?
Well, I will say it is a huge issue in the field. I mean, it's a huge issue now everywhere in terms of high stress, anxiety, depression, burnout, substance use issues. But in the legal field, the statistics are much higher, suicides, all of it. And I got involved, oh God, it's probably been 7 or 8 years now, when I read some, results of studies that showed 36% of lawyers at any one time are suffering from anxiety or depression. And, that was higher than the averages for any people. And so I decided, really to get involved in that issue because, I've got 100 lawyers in my law firm. So that means 36 of them could be suffering from anxiety or depression right now. That's pretty significant. And, there's no reason to suspect that any state, any law firm, any city is any different from the national average. It's not just, large firm, global law firms or New York law firms. It's everybody. And,
Right.
Even especially people that are solo practitioners or working with 2 or 3 other lawyers because they don't have the support.
Right.
Nobody can pick up the slack for you. So it is a huge issue in the profession. And people really weren't talking about it. It was sort of a suck it up. I used to say if somebody at work asks you, how are you? There were only 2 good answers, fine and busy. Like nobody wanted to hear anything else. You were busy, you were, driving, and everything was great. And, if you said, oh, I'm not doing so well, people might be sympathetic, but they wouldn't know what to do with that. And they'd start worrying, oh, maybe there's something wrong with them and not sort of internalizing it and saying, well, there's some days when I'm not doing so well. And it's okay to tell people or to empathize or to try to solve a problem. People really started talking about it more during COVID because, we had over 200 employees in my law firm. And one day we're all in the office and the next day you had 200 people working from home.
Yeah.
That was huge. There wasn't any of that before. I mean, we had laptops, and we could log into our files. We had everything with us wherever we went, but that doesn't mean that people actually worked from home. Everybody thought people would be unproductive, and lo and behold, people were very productive. Some of us took to it right away. Other people hated it and felt isolated. And so I think there was a lot more checking in with people to see how they were doing. And, all through the profession. And I think that improved. And now people are discussing it more. Firms are paying more attention to it. Other legal employers are, bar associations, because they're losing people. Like, how do you retain people in the profession, especially women? Women tended to be the ones to quit and move on to something else or to decide to stay home for a while because it got to be too much. Because, guess what? Not only are we doing all the multiple hours and balancing, but we're also, except for very unusual relationships, doing the lion's share of the home stuff. Now, early on, it was absolutely all of it. But I think also men are stepping up. The other thing is that life has changed. People have so much more outside of work that they need to do. And then as far as the legal profession, which I think is true of any profession, technology. I mean, when I didn't have a cell phone or a smartphone, I didn't even have a car phone. I got a car phone, maybe when I'd been practicing for 15 years. I think I was practicing 10 years before I got a computer or, email.
Okay. I have to ask this question. I literally started laughing with a friend the other day. I'm not trying to be funny because sometimes I say things to my kids and I feel like a dinosaur. Like I explained a fax machine to them the other day and I was like, so here's what we did. Like we found jobs by looking in the paper, like faxing your resume,
mailing it.
Yes, or mailing it. Or calling or showing up or whatever. And I was laughing with a friend and I was like, what do in the 60s? Like, did you just show up with a briefcase and sit down and write? Like, what was?
Yeah, totally. You wrote, or I mean, I haven't had a briefcase in 20 years, but I mean, that was my gift when I graduated law school. You got a nice new leather briefcase.
Great.
And when I started, if I was writing a legal memo or something, I was handwriting it, and then I got to dictate.
Nice. Yeah.
And you dictate, and then, your assistant had this machine that she could transcribe what you said. But when I first started, I was so put off by the dictaphone, as they used to call it, that I used to handwrite it and then read it.
Yeah.
I'm like, why am I doing this? Yeah.
It's so interesting. And, the interesting thing about this, the through line is you have multi-generational people working together. And how do you make that workplace work? So I'm curious, with all your experience, like, have you seen patterns of what is generally a healthy workplace versus what is a more not healthy, toxic workplace?
For sure. Not only because, I have worked for so long in a profession that can be toxic for many reasons, whether it's opposing counsel or people you work with, but it is a profession that can be toxic. Hard driven people, all type A personalities, not really, but most, I
Yeah.
mean, you definitely have different shades in law firms
Yeah.
or with people that you work with. But yeah, I mean, the profession itself can be very toxic and difficult. But I've also, I mean, that's what I did for work.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I saw so many examples of, great workplaces and really poorly managed workplaces and people that treated each other badly, which I'm sure we'll talk about it. But one of the reasons I love doing training. But yeah, it's, how do you manage something like that? And, I always say openness is so important. Like, people didn't used to be open, and they say now, oh yeah, the younger generation is, comfortable talking about mental health and comfortable sharing, personal things that people never would have talked about at work. And, they'd say things like, leave your problems at home, leave work at work. And yeah, that's really easy to say.
Yeah.
But wherever you go, you're taking your whole self. And if you're
Course.
having a good day or a bad day, it translates if you're out with friends or if you're, at your kid's soccer game or whatever it is that you might be doing.
Yeah.
You take yourself everywhere and all the baggage comes with you.
Yeah.
And people started to recognize that and say, you can be having a bad day at work and it doesn't mean you're an awful employee. But what's the out for that? It's like, oh, I need to go take a walk. I'm an adult, and so nobody's going to be looking after, like, why isn't she at her desk? And well, she's gone for a walk, or she's gone to grab a coffee because she needs a few minutes, or she went for a run at lunchtime because that's the only time she has to herself because she's got to pick up the kids and take them to dance class and baseball practice tonight, or volunteers in the community or attends rubber chicken dinners and all those things that you do when you're trying to establish yourself as a professional and raise a family and be a person and a friend.
Yeah.
And a good daughter, a good mother, all of that.
Yeah. Your whole self, be a whole person, right?
Yeah.
And we may get into this later, which is completely fine. But I am curious. I just did a podcast looking at burnout. And what I thought was really interesting is burnout is a symptom of an organization. So like, it's not a DSM term, which I didn't think it was, but it is more geared towards like the organization having certain symptoms and you, the individual, are impacted by it. And it's a relatively new field of study, I guess is the right way to say it. And the other thing that I think is interesting is we think about like, okay, so we're going to be more open in the workplace and we're going to acknowledge that we bring our whole selves to work. And maybe there's wellness programs, right? We all joke about the pizza party, but true wellness programs, you see a lot of benefits now that include access to mental health resources and things like that.
Right.
What are the organizations doing that actually put that into practice versus organizations that have all of these things and it's still, I don't want to say toxic, that feels, and we should probably define what toxic is, but they're doing all of these things, but it's almost in service of saying like, I'm doing it, we're doing it, and we have yoga after work, but like, you still need to get this done. You're still working 60 hours a week or whatever, right? Like, or there's still only 2 days of bereavement leave, like that kind of stuff. Well, and this is a really big question, so I don't expect to have all the answers, but organizations, especially ones that are already established, what are they doing in order to put those wellness practices into the culture?
That's a great question because there are a lot of organizations that have wellness programs, and you've got a couple of different issues, I think, with those. One is sort of the cookie cutter standard. I moderated a panel for the American Bar Association on it's not just yoga and mindfulness. We need cultural change in the profession in order to make people healthy. Yoga and mindfulness are great. I do yoga and I try to practice mindfulness, and it can be very helpful to some people, but to others, it doesn't resonate at all. So just having programs and employee assistance plans is another great example. There are wonderful employee assistance plans out there that will give you 3 free counseling sessions, and they have people that you can talk to if you're having a conflict with an employee, and they can help you find daycare. I mean, there are so many great things about employee assistance plans, and the studies find that they're severely underutilized.
Interesting.
People don't use them.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think they're not using them?
One of the things is that despite how many times they're told, they still don't believe it's confidential. And
that would be my guess.
Yeah, they're worried about that. Sometimes they don't think they need it or that it will be helpful. So I think it's really important, like the companies, the businesses that have done it well, reinforce it, how important it is to use it. People share, like somebody in management shares, hey, I took advantage of the 3 free counseling sessions, or I contacted them because I needed to find housing for my parents that couldn't stay in their house anymore. And guess what? Are they perfect? No, but they have resources and they can get you. So how have you used it? Having representatives of those organizations come into the law firms and do a lunch and learn and say, we can talk to you about, financial literacy or how to save for retirement. I mean, all of that is important, but, the EAP is not just mental health counseling. It's a lot of different things. So how does the employer reinforce using it? But, in organizations, I call law firms, accounting firms, medical practices that are so metric spaced that you have to see so many patients or you have to bill so many hours. Every hour you take out of the day to do something that's not billable hits the bottom line. So you have to do marketing. Well, marketing's not billable. We want you to volunteer in the community. Well, that's not billable, or that doesn't produce income for our business, whatever your role in that business is. So we have to, look at how we view success, how we view money in the bottom line, and say we might earn a little less, but maybe if we require fewer billable hours or give people credit for something other than billable hours that contributes to how they're going to be measured as successful. It really is culture change. It's saying, I needed this. And there was a Boston law firm where the managing partner had a huge, significant drinking problem, had to go to rehab, take time out of work, and what did he do? He came back and he told people about it, and he was successful. And he just, you don't have to always have had the really bad experience to be able to lead. But if you've had the bad experience and you can share it and you can show yourself as vulnerable, it allows other people to be vulnerable as well. And I'm like the young end of baby boomer, which was sort of the suck it up generation.
Yeah.
Because then you may not be doing your job competently.
Correct. And I think, so I was raised by a boomer with a very suck it up mentality at home, right? And that's the mentality that I took for a lot of my life. And you can suck it up to a point, but mental health is mental health, and your body's going to burn out. It really is. There's a reality to these situations. But it's wonderful to hear that management is modeling, because that does change the culture.
Those are the best workplaces, when somebody will model, not by having had a bad experience, but by saying, I'm going to take advantage of the resources that are available, and you're not going to be judged. Stigma is such a big thing when it comes to seeking help in mental health. And we're not going to think that you're a lesser person because you say, I need to take a week off to recharge, whether it's a vacation week or something that you need as a leave of absence for a mental health reason or a health reason.
And it's interesting because I feel like at least the public discourse that I'm hearing right now is it Gen Z? Yeah, not Gen Alpha. Gen Z is like, they don't want to work or whatever, which I don't really believe, but I do think that they're very confident in saying, I need to take 3 days off. They're not going to tell you why. It's really not your
business.
You know what I mean? It's not your
Yeah.
business. It's like, okay, well, how's the work going to get done or whatever? And I think there's a lot of pushback that they're getting for probably setting pretty strong boundaries. And I always call myself like an elder millennial. I'm kind of like in that young end of Gen X, but early or old end of millennial. And like, I was laughing, like we loved to work. Like I was telling like a 20-something-year-old, I was like, you don't understand. We were all friends. We all went to happy hour. We would go out on the weekends together. I still have great friends. Like we've gone on vacations, like all of that. And it's interesting to see how different generations approach work and then are shifting and bending. And yeah, it's really, I think, really interesting.
And the younger generations can teach the older generation.
100%. If you're
and
open,
vice versa.
100%.
If they're willing to listen to each other.
Stay curious, be flexible. I think having openness, but also strong communication of what is allowed, is not allowed. People can make decisions for themselves, boundaries at work. Because it's great.
They want that. They want to know what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. They used to talk about things like unlimited PTO or flexible. And the studies again showed that people tended to take less PTO when they had as much as they wanted because they didn't know what was okay. So I'll always say that to supervisors, take your vacation. Because if you don't take vacation, then the people that work for you don't think they can take vacation.
Oh, 100%. I remember telling my team, because I get up early, and especially when I had littles that were up early, I'd send an email at like 4 a.m. I expect a response, and I'd get a response at 6 or 6:30. And I would say, I don't expect a response except during business hours. And then I was like, that's not good enough. That's on you. Set the delay. Like you respond to your boss. You know what I mean? So like, again, I think it's not just saying what the expectations are. It's living it on whatever the spectrum is. And
modeling the behavior.
Yeah. And the other thing too, I'd love your opinion on is it seems like we are almost in a backlash from major corporations of taking away benefits and taking away from employees. And it's like, to me, it's mind-boggling.
Yeah.
I'm curious what the thought process is there.
It's interesting because just the climate in the world.
Yeah.
Or at least in the country is different.
Yeah.
So, and I think that it's been demonstrated the most in the tech sector.
Yes.
Where they were the loosey-goosey ones.
Oh, no.
They were the ones that was such a cool thing to have the kegs of beer and the foosball tables and the ping pong tables. And now it's like, oh.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the employees, some of them used to say, we don't, I mean, it's fine if you do that, but we don't really consider that an employee benefit.
Right.
I mean, it's nice if you have that, but it's not critical to us, especially the Gen Zs really are like, when we're done work, we're out of here. Or we can work from Starbucks and be perfectly productive. But yeah, I do think that's the case. I think that, you saw it with the backlash against DEI with companies. The first sign of it was eliminating the diversity officer position, chief diversity officer positions. Number one, they're not revenue generating. So if there's tightness in the budget, the people that are not revenue generating sort of go first. But I think there was a little fear of, being called woke, Target backpedaling on some of that. And hey, they've backlash for them backpedaling. And I think people sort of kind of go with public opinion. Unfortunately, public opinion is so divided right now that, you're going to make friends with some people and alienate others, or you're going to be permanently neutral. And, at least none of us that grew up in the 60s or 70s think neutral is a good thing.
Well, neutrality is a stance, and it's interesting because what you were saying about billable hours and determining as a culture within your company of like, what is value outside of billable hours, DEI is incredibly, there's data behind it. DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging is incredibly beneficial to organizations. But if you're only looking in billable hours and revenue generation, and that is your culture. And trust me, I'm all about, you need to be profitable, like all of that. But to what end? And I'm also wondering, I don't know the answer to this. It feels like the economy has shifted so much. It is more difficult now for these mass profits that shareholders want or whatever. Like, I feel like there's a real reckoning, but it's coming down on employees not on leadership and the government to figure this out.
Yeah. And I will say that, a lot of employers, law firms, I mean, my former law firm stuck behind diversity and they have not changed their stance. They haven't taken it off their website. I mean, there's a lot of companies and employers who have said, no, we're doubling down on it because we think it's a good thing.
Yeah.
It's a good thing for the culture of an organization. It's a good thing for the bottom line. And you should have diverse ideas and people with diverse backgrounds. And that doesn't necessarily mean race and gender, although of course that's included, but everything.
Yeah.
People who just have different ways of learning. And so it's just important to have different perspectives. And I think a lot of times people forget that that's what diversity means.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean affirmative action. It means, hearing different voices and making everybody feel as though they're welcome at work.
Right.
Which took many, many years to move the needle on that. And now, sadly, it looks like in some ways we're backsliding. But I think most people are basically good and accepting of those they know. It's kind of the unknown out there that gets, demonized. But I do think you're right. The financial pressures, some of the benefits, I think there has been backsliding. I mean, some of it's cost. I mean, look at the cost of health insurance and how that's skyrocketed. Yeah. And now pulling back on what might be available on the exchange for people to buy personally, that's made it tougher. So those are, I think, huge issues, just the cost of everything. Yeah. I think that's been an impact. And I think also some employers are saying things like, well, they don't really value X, Y, and Z. And I don't necessarily think that's true. I think everybody doesn't value the same thing.
Yeah.
It may be because you're 22 years old and you don't know how important it is to save for retirement, or that now is the time to start. And that's education. And some of it is, I don't need family and health insurance. I'm a single person, or I don't need a lot of time off because I'd rather be doing my job, whatever it is that people don't value. And so they paint with a broad brush, and the best benefit plans and the best, I think, workplace cultures are the ones that allow for flexibility so that people can make it work for them. Whether it's, the hours you work, the location you work, what you do in addition to your core job. How do you contribute to your workplace? Do you volunteer? Do you run some committee? What is it that makes you a part of our workplace culture? It's not Big Brother. It's what works for the individual.
And so you spent almost 40 years doing that work, and then you transitioned into consulting. What made you shift into that work? And can you talk a little bit about, like, what does that mean?
Yeah. So for me, it really was burnout.
And how would you define your burnout? Like, what did you experience?
Yeah. So some of it was, I found that I was losing empathy, which is a really important value for an attorney to have. Mm-hmm. You have to be sympathetic to what your client is dealing with, and not like, oh, God, really? Should that be? Some things deserve, oh my God, really?
I think I've been that employee sometimes. No, I'm just kidding.
So, certainly that. And then feeling as though I was so stressed all the time that I wasn't acting like myself. I mean, I was more irritable. I was testier. I couldn't relax. And when I was not at work, I couldn't enjoy what I was doing and being in the moment. And I'll say, like, one of the things that happened is I was in a meeting, was a director's meeting. So we would have, like, all the partners of the law firm meet once a month. And it was on Zoom because at the time, this was probably late 2020. Mm-hmm. And I was getting text messages from a client. And then I got a text message from one of the other directors that was in the meeting. And I said, okay, this meeting ends at 6. And then I have to talk to a client at 6 when this meeting ends. And he said, well, I have a client with a crisis. Can you talk to him at 7? And I was just like, no, I can wait until tomorrow. And it was just like everything was the perfect storm. And I'm like, I'm so done with this. And just, you'd sit in the car, like when you're in the parking garage, and you got to steel yourself to go into the building. And
Yeah.
what am I? It was an interesting thing because at the time, a lot of people were really shocked. And I gave a year's notice. So
Oh,
it was
nice.
transition out to retirement. And I wasn't sure what I was going to do, like whether I was going to stop complete. I didn't think I'd stop completely, but maybe I'd just do volunteer work because I was on a lot of boards or whatever. And I always say when people are thinking about that transition into retirement, you need a therapist, a coach, and a financial planner.
Yep.
Because you need to get all those ducks in a row. You need to figure out, is this what I really want? Why am I doing this? What am I going to do next? And then can I afford to do it? So, I mean, it's important.
It's really important.
Those resources. I know you work with women as a coach, and sometimes you tell like, what is your? Well, I'm going to stop this. Okay, you're going to stop that. But at the time I was 61, retired at 62. So what are you going to do with your life? I used to say I knew I was going to do something because I still had shit to say. And I used to do wrote a lot of blog posts, and I would speak on panels, and I never had much of a filter. The thing now is I can have less of a filter. Because, I don't represent an organization.
Right.
But I think people were really surprised that I sort of retired like at the top of it was my biggest earning year because I was still on the upward trajectory.
Yeah.
Even at that age, it's shows how long it takes to develop. I was heading a practice group and I just had lots going on. I was chair of a board and I was just like, I just need to not do this anymore.
Good for you. Was it hard at all? Like, did you question yourself or did it feel like, no, this is right?
I didn't question myself in the beginning. I thought, this is great. I think maybe about a year later, I started to say, oh, should I have done this? I missed certain aspects. Wow. But I didn't miss everything. And I had work to do like almost immediately. People reached out. I opened it, we started established an LLC.
Yeah.
Did a website or had my son-in-law who's in marketing do a website for me.
Love it.
And I said, oh, I'll do some mediation. I'll do some training. And people found me. And, at times it's been busier than I'd wanted it to be, but it's on my terms. And I can remember actually my mother was visiting in Florida. She goes, I think you're working as hard now as you did when you were with the firm. I'm like, Mom, it's 2:00 in the afternoon and we're getting pedicures. So no, I am not.
Yeah.
I'm working hard, but it's not the same.
Yeah.
And I'm doing it for myself. I'm doing things I want to do and things I have fun doing. And, the lovely thing is I can charge what I want, so I can work for nonprofits and charge them less. It's nice to have that flexibility, but still feel like my head's in the game.
Yeah.
And I'm stimulated. And, at some point I'll be like, okay, I'm completely done with this, but I haven't reached that point yet.
And it's great that you get to do it on your terms. It's completely up to you.
And I would have been terrified to do that at 35. When I had a baby at that point.
Right.
And like the mortgage on my first house, I think, and all that stuff. I mean, people have a lot of courage to go out and try to, I wasn't looking to duplicate my income, or anything like that. And whatever I was going to earn was going to be some extra money to do what I wanted. It wasn't like I was desperate. I mean, I put my ducks in a row, so I knew I was okay.
Yeah.
And, I kind of said, well, I have a pension, I have this, so I'm never going to be out on the street. I may not be in the same position, but I'll be okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's so important. And I think something else you mentioned is so important. And especially for women that are ambitious, have, whether it's working for themselves or want C-suite ambitions later in life, understanding the season of your life and the resources around you. And I'm very much a coach that lives in reality. Like, I believe people can do anything, right? Like, I think we are limitless. I do think that there's reality to different situations, and 35 for you wasn't the right time. It wasn't, and there's nothing wrong or right about it. And I think so often, at least in my experience, we are shown an idea of a leader, and I'm like, but you have no idea what's going on in their world. You have no idea. Like, so I guess I say all of that to say that it's wonderful that you were able to do it on your own terms, something you still liked, give yourself time to discover, like how much do you want to do, how much you don't want to do, because everybody's journey is personal, works for, what's her name? Emily Greedy. That's like the big like conversation now. And I'm just like, can we stop doing this? Can we stop
Yeah.
like highlighting
Yeah.
people who have a staff and, like stuff that you just never see?
Or a stay-at-home dad taking care of their kids, or like, you're right, a staff and, nannies that live at your house. And that's not reality for most people.
For most people. And I, trust me, I am all about, like, I say this all the time, like, if you can throw money at stuff, do it, right? Like, if it really does make your life easier. Another conversation is, if you need to get a nanny, awesome. What are you willing to miss? What are you willing to, what do you want to show up for? And for me, I was willing to miss a lot for a while. And then I was the room mom, and then I was the soccer mom. And I was like, I don't want to miss this, like, and so my priorities shifted, and to be able to give yourself that flexibility, I think, is so important. But within the consulting, so you do mediation and you're also doing trainings and workshops and things like that. What are you bringing? I mean, you have this wealth of experience. Like, what do you tend to bring to different organizations and lead them through that culture change?
Well, it's funny. I think that I have always described myself as somebody who was going to be down to earth, approachable, tell it like I see it. So when I do, for example, and, for a while I was doing a lot of DEI training because, a lot of organizations had not had that, or anti-harassment training. And I still do that because organizations still need it. Surprise, surprise. I mean, I've heard stories about the group chat at work with all the gross sexual commentary.
Yeah.
Like, really? What made you think that was okay? I mean, no company is saying it's fine for you to do that.
Right.
But sometimes supervisors aren't enforcing, or there are behaviors that, because people are people, and you can tell people don't do this, but you have to give them concrete examples of, this is a problem and this is what the consequence will be.
Yeah.
And, I tried to not to do that in a really sort of preachy way.
Yeah.
I give real life examples, and, so I think that that's sort of my approach. So I think what I do bring to organizations is that ton of, like, got a repository of examples in the bank of, these are situations, whether they are cases that are actual court cases or examples of things that I've seen in workplaces and schools that are just real problems that some people don't recognize as problems. I remember training at a boarding school and using a hypothetical scenario about using one of your students as a babysitter. Was that a boundary issue? And a lot of the faculty that were in this room were insulted that I would say that's not something you should do. And they go, our children are, our students are, they're reliable, they're honest. I'm like, no, that's not what I'm saying. That the child is going to steal from you or harm your child.
Right.
What I'm saying is, what are the other kids going to say when, Joey is at Mrs. Smith's house watching her kids, or, Sally's driving Mrs. Smith's kids to soccer practice, how does that look?
Right.
Or, what about dating a parent? Like, is that okay? And why is that a problem? Well, the student's not in my class. So it's like, understand the perception from somebody else's perspective. And they go, oh, yeah. You don't think of it because you're not wired to think that way. You're thinking, hey, this is a good kid that I have in my class, and I can pay him $20 an hour to watch my kids when I go on a date with my husband.
Like, them, you trust them, like,
yeah.
And then what happens when that kid that you know and trust and whatever gets a C in your class and they're feeling a way about it, or,
Or do you have, are you leaving like next week's test in your office on your desk, and, you think they're not going to walk into other parts of the house and see things?
Right.
Just so many potential pitfalls.
So it seems like so many of these things come from a good place, and they're just not thinking about, because they would never.
You have predators, but for the most part, these are just people who, are doing their thing and, oh yeah, that kid could use a little extra money. So I'm going to just like your workplace is a community, but oh my God, like schools and boarding schools and colleges. I mean, that you're living in community with people.
Yes.
The boundaries get blurred all the time. And
perception is reality.
oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't mean that. Maybe you didn't, but what was the impact? That statement on people don't know the impact if other people don't tell them. That's another thing. Like, you want people to say, you just really hurt me by saying that. And if you just suck it up and move on, which is, sort of what our culture had been in the past. So these trainings, you try to empower people. If they're offending you, if they're harming you in some way, tell them.
Yes. But it's interesting too. I mean, I think a few things. I'm not sure that we necessarily train managers. So many times high achieving individual contributors become a manager, but those are two very different skills, right? And I've been in that situation where I'm like, oh shit, I don't know how to do this, right?
Right.
And conflict resolution, especially what we were talking about with DEI, which DEI is hugely important, but when you're bringing in people from so many different backgrounds, and how they were taught conflict resolution at home, much less in previous work and education, it's a recipe for disaster sometimes. So I wish we talked through that more. And I think some personalities are just better at it. Like I always say, like, I appreciate conflict because everything's figure outable. Like, let's just figure this out, right? Like, let's just talk it out and get it out on the table, and we can be respectful. And I've also been in situations where I would rather just change my name and move to another country than have that conversation,
Right.
So yeah.
Difficult conversations. I mean, they got like part of conflict resolution is having difficult conversations. And some people avoid that at all costs, which is why sometimes you don't get to the conflict resolution mediation point until it's too late. The relationship is already poisoned. Try to hit on it early when you can actually try to get people to listen to each other and empathize. I mean, we're not that great at listening to each other these days. So I think we need to kind of get back to that. Like, what's your perspective and what is the impact on the other person? Because that legally is what's going to get you in trouble, not what you actually intended. Yeah, I think that's really important. And I think some of my favorite trainings are respectful workplace training, which you do the anti-harassment piece, but then you talk about how do we want to treat each other? How do we want to be treated? And I think that's important. And my other sort of favorite right now is supervisor training to those people that got promoted into roles that, they were really good at the job and now they have to mentor people. They have to evaluate people. They have to train, all that, in which, oh yeah, I know how to do this and I do it really well, but I have no idea how to. So what do I fall back on? The way I was trained or mentored or not mentored. And you can tell people like, and you see it in law firms, like really smart lawyers are not necessarily great at training people or mentoring people because their personality doesn't fit with that. And nobody's told them how to do it. Some people will never be able to do it, but some people can do it with training. And
yeah. It's interesting. I don't know if you've had this experience, but in the fundraising world, I always joked like the best gift officers, I mean, they're just rock stars. They should not be in charge of anything. Like they should absolutely not be in charge of anything other than raising money because they're so good at it. But like for whatever reason, that personality does not translate to like management, much less like getting your receipts in. Like it's just
that's true with some people that are really, really successful salespeople.
Yeah.
It's the pitch, it's the relationship they build with the customer or the donor, but it's not necessarily bringing other people along to do the same thing.
They were some of my favorite people, but I was like, it was really funny. I was like, yeah, they're great people. I was just like, yeah, you should not be in charge of a committee. And I'm curious.
Because I said so. That's not,
Or they're like, I don't care. I want to go close this gift. Like, do whatever you want. That's usually what it was. I was like, cool, whatever you decide, like, gotta go.
Because that's how I'm evaluated. That's how I'm paid.
Yeah.
So I want to do what's going to make me important to the business and will enhance my bottom line.
Yes.
As a person.
And I think that's a good point too, is knowing yourself and being comfortable with it. Especially, I can only imagine at a law firm, like I would imagine partner is the goal.
Yeah,
It's like
for the
something
most part, not everybody wants that, but that
Yeah.
is that's the brass ring to reach for.
Yeah. And I think as you're evolving and changing in different seasons of life, like really embracing who you are, there's nothing wrong with the example I gave of like always being a gift officer who's just really good at their job. Like there's nothing
Yes.
wrong with that.
An individual contributor, whatever it is in your business, that may be what you want to do and you're good at. Leave me alone.
Yeah. And I am curious too, would you find any differences in, especially in leadership, of how women were treated and expectations than men, or not really? Like in your specific work, would you find, like when it's coming to mediation, when it's coming to litigation, I'm often curious, like some of the women I work with feel like they're in this double bind situation of like, I either am not assertive enough or I'm
Oh,
too,
yeah.
or, like they want diversity, equity, and inclusion, but like they don't want to hear it when I'm giving my team the opportunity to stay at home for work-life balance or things like that. And it's anecdotal, but from their experience, and I will say from my experience, they're getting pushback on things that they don't feel like their male colleagues are getting pushback on, specifically in leadership.
Yeah, some of that, it's interesting because when I started in 1984, it was very different from how it is now. Although some of this still happens today, but not as much. But 1984, and you walked in your suit with your briefcase, people thought you were the court stenographer and, not the lawyer. I mean, it was much more difficult, and definitely, I would say the double standard piece was more paternalistic, I think, towards like young female attorneys. Like, oh, we're not going to make them work with that, really difficult client because that person's going to chew them up and spit them out, or that kind of thing. So there was a lot of that sort of protection, relegating them to the research and the memo writing, but not necessarily taking a while to give them the opportunity to argue in court. And then it kind of started to morph where you'd put one woman in management. And because that woman could represent all women, right? Because we all think alike. And they're patting themselves on the back. We have a woman in management. We have a woman in the C-suite. We did it, whatever it is. Yeah, look at us. We're diverse and we're advancing women, which was a big deal. And, it's, people talk about, why are we still talking about firsts? Because firsts are a big deal.
Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah.
When you think about like putting Ketanji Brown Jackson on the Supreme Court and saying she's the first African-American woman, it is still a big deal because
it's a huge deal.
Yes, there's been a Latino women, there's been other women, but it's a big deal when but you're right. They didn't necessarily want to hear, or maybe gave some lip service to hearing. And this is a broad generalization. It's not true of every business.
No.
And then, all of the research shows that you need more than one of whatever it is, whether it's a race, a religion, a gender, because the one person can't represent everybody, may not want to. And sometimes, we used to say, pulls the rope up at the treehouse because, okay, I made it. And there's only going to be one of us and it's going to be me.
Yeah.
So now, with more women in positions of authority, you have a little bit more critical mass. So I think it's improved, but that old adage of a man is assertive and a woman is a bitch, you still, excuse my language, but you still hear it. You can't approach things. Look at it when you look at things like political campaigns and how women are viewed versus men.
Yep.
And people asking the question, like, would a woman president be strong enough? And not all men are strong enough.
No.
But, it is there. If you come across too assertive, the people are put off by it when you're a woman. And if you're a man and you're softer, backlash for that. So the gender stereotypes are definitely still there. There's a maneuvering that has to be done. And some people do it really, really well. But I can remember when I was a relatively young lawyer, and women were starting to get into positions of power in banks and law firms and organizations. There was a lot of shade thrown on those women.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of them had made decisions not to have children because dividing your attention was a hindrance. And so there was name calling, some of it's jealousy, for sure, but it's gotten better, but it's still there.
Yeah. It's interesting. I worry about it. And this just may be the echo chamber that I'm in, but I keep seeing younger women, like late teens, early 20s, and this trad wife light discourse that's happening and being promoted by other women. And I'm like, oh boy, this is not the way to go.
Scary.
It's scary, but I also I think there's some religious aspects to it, which I will not touch
Yes.
conversation, but what I do think is valid. And I just read Bell Burden's Strangers, which like I think every woman should read. But I do think that sometimes, or not sometimes, I do think part of this conversation is stemming from not ultimately being supported in whichever choices you're making as a woman, whether it's deciding not to have children because you don't want them, which is totally fine.
Yeah,
If you want them and you've been told you can be anything and you can get to the C-suite and break the glass ceiling, but you're penalized if your kid's sick. And there's all that labor, unseen labor at home and in the workplace, so there's so much stacked against you still, and not just women.
So it can be an easy out. Is that what you
It's
said?
an
Like,
easy
I'm gonna
out.
be a
It's
trad wife and I don't have to deal with somebody's going to take care of me.
getting to the root of the issue of like, no, like we
Right.
need more support generally for everybody, not
For
just
everybody,
women.
men too, who
It's
have
men
kids
too.
and have other responsibilities, aging parents, whatever it might be. Yeah.
And I saw it when I was at University of Maryland. The state of Maryland changed parental leave. So anyone could take parental leave. I think it was 12 weeks. It was wonderful. I mean, I think women in general who had been through maternity leave embraced it because we were like, we get it. And you need that help, right? If you're a new parent, regardless of man, woman, whatever your partnership is, or singlehood, you need support. And what I started to find is men were coming back and were like, holy shit, like I had no idea. So much more empathetic within all of it. So I do think that we've sort of talked around this a little bit, like that first conversation. Why are you upset that we're talking about first? Why aren't we looking at the system underneath of it? Why are there still first? Like, why are there still first? Why are we getting to a point of litigation or mediation? What's underneath of it, right? And like bringing that to light and learning the skills to bring it to light and to move through it. And that's a really long way to ask this question of what advice would you give to people to have those difficult conversations, especially when maybe it's the last thing you want to do? What's one piece of advice that you would give to people listening today to do that effectively?
I would say, number one, people have to learn to listen. And, that's a critical skill for anybody who is in a people profession or has a people component to their job. Like, really listen. Very often you see it when somebody asks you a question and you're answering and they're not retaining it because they're thinking about the next question they're going to ask. They're not focused. So I think that's really important. It's like training people to take depositions or to ask questions or interview people, interview potential employees, ask the question, listen to the answer, and then instead of moving on to the next question on your list, engage and follow up based on what the answer was. And what I would always say is that we all dread some of those difficult conversations. Most of them are not as difficult as we have built up in our minds.
Yes.
We create, in a vacuum, we create the absolute worst case scenario. And we have the argument with ourselves. We know what they're going to say, and then I'm going to say this. And, take a deep breath, speak respectfully. So critical, because if you're respectful to somebody, usually, because what are you afraid of? They're going to cry, they're going to yell at me, they're going to storm out of the room, they're going to physically attack me, whatever it might be, is, be respectful in the conversation, listen to the response, give people an opportunity to explain. Try not to build it up as something as bad as it is. And I know she gets some good reviews, some bad reviews, but Mel Robbins has a pretty good podcast on how to have a difficult conversation. She's not the be all and end all, but she's pretty good about some of those things. And I've used some of her videos, workplace trainings. And so I would suggest to people to watch one of her podcasts that I know I've used before in the past about how to have a difficult conversation. Putting it off is the worst thing because the situation's just going to get worse. You're going to be more frustrated. You're going to be more likely to, jump down the person's throat. They're going to be defensive.
Yeah.
Not all of them are going to go perfectly. You're going to have some uncomfortable conversations with people, especially if you're a manager, but it may not be as bad as you build it up to be.
Yeah. I have literally said to myself, you're talking to yourself right now. Like this isn't happening. Like I have to, like, this isn't happening in real life. Stop talking to yourself. Like, I think
whether that's in a relationship, a friendship, a work, you get prepared to have this conversation and you have built it up in your mind and have every answer the other person's going to give. And it's always much worse, I think, than it ends up being.
Yeah. And I see this all the time with the women that I work with sometimes it's a lack of self-trust. And I'm like, what are you worried about? To your point, what are you worried about that's going to happen? Well, I'm afraid they're going to get upset. Okay. And then what?
I don't want to make them feel bad.
And that's fine because you're a nice person, but you're a nice person. So you will handle it in that moment, like trust yourself to have the conversation. And to what you were saying, and it is such a skill and you have to practice it every day and have that self-awareness, is listen to understand, not to respond, right? And when you're approaching it that way, adding a layer of self-trust that you can handle whatever it is. And another thing that I have to remind myself of this is what you don't confront consumes you, and what you do confront resolves. It really will take up so much energy the more you put it off. It can feel good in the moment, but it's just going to build and build and build. So, we've talked about so many things. Like, is there anything we haven't talked about that you want to make sure listeners hear?
I don't think so. I think the important thing in this day and age is to try to keep reinforcing just respect and trying to gain understanding. I that's so critical, whether you're talking about something political or just, something that's happening at a baseball game. It's just, think before jumping down someone's throat. I have to remind myself of that because I can be emotional.
And I have to remind myself, I like discourse. I like discussion. Debate. Yeah, sure. And sometimes I'm like, you're making it worse. And that's not the intention. You're like, to what end? But I like your example of Mel Robbins because I find Mel Robbins extremely helpful at times and other times I don't. So you know what?
Right.
The stuff I don't worry about. Like, you can just move on. And I think we are in a climate right now where there is this expectation of 100% across the board that you have to act upon and not giving room for people have multitudes. And there's some things, and I have mine that you cannot accept. And that's fine. That's not what I'm talking about. But trying to understand and trying to get a different perspective. And maybe, that's saying agree to disagree or whatever, which I kind of hate. But really saying like, to what end? To what end is this, right?
Don't paint people with such a broad brush.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Not all, whatever you want to call it, liberals, conservatives, women, men, they don't all think alike.
There's no monolith.
Say, because I'm X, I must think Y. No.
Correct. And that's so challenging.
Yeah.
That is so challenging. Like, we love putting people and things in boxes, right? It helps understand. So I ask people the same 3 questions, but I do have a little curveball for you. And it's not super juicy, but what is the one, like, as you were figuring out what type of law you wanted to practice, what was the one that you were like, absolutely not?
Probably tax and real estate.
Interesting. Just not
numbers, very, very no gray area.
And I'm curious too. So what advice would you give to your younger self?
It probably depends on what age, but I think that it'll be okay because I think when you're younger, you sort of have a plan And if things don't go exactly as planned, whatever that may be, you think, oh, this is a disaster. And it's not. You'll get through whatever it is. And, maybe you'll get to where you want to be, but you'll take a more circuitous route. Or
Yeah.
maybe you'll change your mind. And whatever it is, just try to stay in the moment and you'll get there.
Yeah. That's good advice. And what do you love most about this work?
I love interacting with people. And when I say interacting, I mean like really getting, whether it's feedback, whether it's a dialogue, whether it's getting a better understanding of, whoever it is and where they're coming from. I like working with people and helping people out, whether it's an organization, whether it's individuals. And I really take it personally if like a mediation fails.
Mhm.
Even though I'm not the one that has to make the decision, but I really try to hopefully put something positive into people's lives so that they feel like, okay, that wasn't a waste of time to work with her.
Yeah. And how can people find you, and what are the things that you specialize in?
So the one thing we haven't talked about, and not everybody is going to need this kind of thing, is I do a lot of independent investigations where if there's a workplace issue or, a conduct issue or somebody complains about someone and it needs to be investigated. I do that. I do training of all kinds in workplaces and in schools. I do conflict resolution, like working with teams or groups of people, that whether it's a department or whether it's, two partners to a business, to try to get to either an end result or some type of an accord so they can work better together. I have a website. So that's the best way to reach me, is through Charla Stevens Consulting.
And I am curious about something. I could just talk to you all day. But when you were talking about it with workplace investigations, and especially if there's an HR complaint about a person, I've always been curious about this. If it gets to that point, and even if the person is cleared of it or you get to some sort of resolution, how does the person stay? I feel like once it gets to that point, it's almost like, should there be a separation? Have you ever seen it work out?
It does often work out where people can, and it's important to do some restorative work after that. Like, maybe have a facilitated conversation, with somebody from outside. If you don't have it, typically they may not work with somebody internal, but yes, often it does, but I've had situations where we've made recommendations about this supervisor needs training or mentoring or this or that. And they go, yeah, I'm not on board with that. And they resign.
Gotcha.
Or the individual who feels as though something bad happened to them, whether it's harassment, discrimination, bullying, and there's a finding that it wasn't. That's where you really need to do some restorative work, or sometimes that person will leave. The goal is to keep everybody.
Right.
And if you do that restorative work, sometimes you get it from a different perspective. We're going to train the individual. We're going to train the workforce, because although we don't find there was a violation of policy, or maybe there was a violation, but it was a little violation and something that doesn't warrant someone being terminated, but they're going to get a warning in their file and they're going to get some training. I think people who complain want to know that they were listened to, that they were taken seriously. If they were not believed, that's tough, but it's like maybe their perspective was a little off. I think that communication is important. Don't just have the investigation, put it in a drawer and never speak of it again.
Like, let's just all avoid this. This never happened.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
That's great. Well, Charla, this has been such a great conversation. Thank you so much for all your time today.
I'm so fast.
I know. But this was great and so interesting. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.